Welcome to another deep dive with me. This time we're going deep into the world of Zen Buddhism and art. And to help us navigate this fascinating territory, we have the perfect guide, Alan Watts' book, The Way of Zen.
Yeah, I think it's a great choice for this topic.
Definitely. So, as I was reading it, I kept coming across this idea of non-duality. And I have to admit, it's a bit of a head-scratcher for me.
Yeah, I get that it can be a tricky concept.
It is. So how does it play into this connection between Zen and art?
Well, you see, at its heart, non-duality is about transcending those illusions that make us separate everything into opposites, like good and bad, pleasure and pain, self and other.
Okay, so instead of always dividing things into categories, Zen is about seeing them as interconnected, like all part of one whole.
Exactly. And there's this really cool image that Watts uses to illustrate this. The moon reflected in the water.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
The reflection is inseparable from the moon itself.
Right.
You can't have one without the other. And this points to the unity of the perceiver and the perceived. So maybe for Zen artists, there's no real separation between themselves and what they create.
Yeah. Like, instead of imposing their will on the world, they're expressing the world as an extension of themselves.
That's a really insightful connection. And this leads us to another super important Zen concept, the idea of purposelessness.
Okay, purposelessness. Now, that sounds a little counterintuitive, especially when we're talking about art.
I know, right? But it's not about doing nothing. It's more about letting go of that constant chase for goals, particularly those based on some fixed idea of who we should be in the future.
So how does this purposelessness actually play out in how Zen art is created?
Well, imagine a gardener tending to their plants.
Yeah.
They find joy not just in that fully grown plant, but in the entire process of growth.
Right.
And similarly, in Zen art, the act of creation holds just as much value as the finished piece.
That makes sense, but isn't that a paradox? Because Watts also talks about the paradox of trying to be spontaneous.
Yeah. It's a fascinating one, isn't it?
If you're trying to be spontaneous, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose?
You're absolutely right. And it highlights how self-consciousness can actually hinder natural action. Watts quotes Yunmen, a Zen master, who simply says, "In walking, just walk." It's about letting go of that inner critic and just allowing ourselves to be fully present in the moment.
That reminds me of when I try too hard to force creativity and I just end up feeling blocked. Maybe it's because I'm overthinking it instead of trusting my own intuition.
Exactly. And when we look at Zen art, we see this effortless mastery, There's a sense of spontaneity that comes from complete presence in the creative process.
It's like the artist isn't trying to control the outcome, but is allowing it to unfold naturally.
Exactly.
Watts also uses the term Suchness when he's talking about the Zen approach to art. It seems to be about capturing the world as it is, without all their judgments and interpretations.
Yeah, suchness, or tathata as it's called in Sanskrit. It's the inherent thusness of reality.
So Zen artists are striving to express that raw essence of what they perceive.
Absolutely. They're not trying to idealize things or impose their own concepts. They're trying to reveal that unfiltered essence of what they see.
Do you have any favorite examples of Zen art that really embody this idea of suchness?
Oh, definitely. Sung Dynasty landscape paintings are a perfect example.
Those are incredible. So serene.
Aren't they? And these artists, they use negative space so effectively, the absence of things, to evoke the vastness and the tranquility of nature.
So they're not just painting mountains and trees. They're also painting the emptiness, the silence that surrounds them.
Exactly. And that emptiness, it's not a void. It's a living presence that's just as important as the forms themselves. Think of Mayan, who is a master of painting by not painting.
Painting by not painting. That's such a Zen concept.
Right. It reminds me of that saying, less is more.
It really does. And speaking of less is more, let's shift gears to another art form that's deeply influenced by Zen haiku.
Oh, haiku. I love haiku.
Me too. Those incredibly short, powerful poems that capture a fleeting moment in nature. But how do they connect to Zen exactly?
Well, I think it's that brevity. Haiku cut to the essence of an experience, much like Zen emphasizes being present in the moment. Think about Basho's haiku, about the child who lights a fire and offers a snowball as something nice. Or the one about lightning, where he says, "How admirable, he who thinks not, life is fleeting when he sees the lightning."
Wow, those are incredible. It's amazing how much emotion and depth they convey in just a few words.
Right, and in the same way that haiku captures a moment in nature, the Japanese tea ceremony, or chado, embodies Zen principles in ritual form.
I've always been fascinated by the tea ceremony. What makes it so distinctly Zen?
Well, it's the intentionality behind everything. Every movement is precise, the utensils are simple, and even the imperfections in those tea bowls,
Yeah, I've noticed
the
it.
cracks, the rough textures, those are all seen as adding to their beauty. It's about celebrating the natural world in all its forms.
So instead of striving for perfect uniformity, it's about appreciating the inherent beauty in the way things are.
Exactly. And this leads us to another fascinating expression of Zen the garden. Now, these gardens aren't meant to be miniature replicas of nature. They're designed to evoke its essence.
Right. I've always found those Zen gardens so serene and minimalist.
Me too.
But what's the philosophy behind them?
Well, the gardener works with nature, not against it. And there's a sense of what Watts calls intentionless intention in how they prune and shape the plants.
It's almost like they're cultivating nature while simultaneously cultivating themselves.
You got it.
This deep dive has already given me a whole new lens for appreciating art. It's not just about creating something beautiful, it's about expressing a whole philosophy, a way of being in the world.
Absolutely, and that's what makes it so powerful. Zen art isn't just about aesthetics. It's about engaging with life on a much deeper level. And it's fascinating how those gardens actually mirror the Zen approach to life itself. It's not about trying to control nature, but about working with it, finding that balance between intention and letting go.
Right, and it really strikes me how all these pieces fit together like Zen art. It goes beyond just creating beautiful things. It's about expressing a whole philosophy.
Exactly, and that's what gives it such depth. It's not just about what we see, but about how we connect with the world around us.
Yeah, Watts talks about how Western art often comes from this idea of conquering. Like the artist has to impose their will on the materials, on the world itself.
Yeah, and that's such a different perspective from the Eastern, particularly the Zen approach. There's this understanding that we're not separate from nature, but a part of it. So the artist isn't trying to dominate the medium, but to work in harmony with it.
I'm trying to picture that. It's almost like a dance, would you say, where both partners contribute to the movement?
That's a beautiful analogy. It really is about finding that flow, that effortless connection between the artist and the materials, between the artist and the world around them.
And that effortless action, that wu wei, as Watts calls it, it's not about being passive, is it? It's about acting with intention,
Mhm.
but without that forceful striving.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's like that gardener we talked about. They're not just letting the garden run wild, they're tending to it, but in a way that allows the plants to express their own unique beauty.
So it's not about bending things to our will, but about guiding, nurturing, allowing things to unfold in their own way. I like that.
It's a beautiful way to put it, and I think that's one of the key lessons we can take away from Zen art. This idea of trusting the process, letting go of that need to control everything, and being open to what emerges.
And some dynasty landscape painters, Watts uses them as examples of masters of this approach.
Oh, absolutely. Their paintings are so much more than just beautiful depictions of nature. They're expressions of this deep embodied understanding of our connection to the world around us.
Thinking of those misty mountains, those tranquil rivers, it's like they're inviting us to step into that stillness, into that sense of oneness with nature.
And that emptiness, that negative space they use so effectively, it's not a void, it's a presence. It allows the forms in the painting to breathe, to come alive.
That makes me think of the silence between the notes in music. It's what gives the piece its depth and resonance.
Such a great connection. It really highlights how Zen art isn't just about what we see, it's about what we feel, what we sense on a deeper level. It engages all our senses, not just our intellect.
And this brings us back to that idea of suchness, seeing the world as it is, without all our preconceptions and judgments.
Yes, peeling back those layers of interpretation and experiencing that raw, unfiltered reality of the moment.
I'm starting to see how this Zen approach to art could really change the way we experience life itself. It's almost like a practice in mindfulness, being fully present in each moment, finding beauty in the ordinary, what's imperfect and fleeting.
That's a really profound insight, and it reminds us that Zen art isn't just about passive observation. It's about actively engaging with the world. It's about cultivating a sense of wonder, of appreciation, of gratitude for everything around us.
Yeah, it's like we're training our minds to see through new eyes to find joy in those smallest things.
Exactly, and that's a practice that can truly enrich our lives in countless ways.
This is starting to feel less like a deep dive and more like a journey of self-discovery.
And that's the beauty of Zen, isn't it? It's not just a philosophy, it's a way of life. And art is one of the many paths that can lead us to that deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So where do we go from here? We've explored these core principles of Zen and how they manifest in art, but how do we apply these insights to our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that each of us has to answer for ourselves.
So it's not about finding a set of rules or instructions to follow, but about cultivating a way of being, an attitude towards life.
Precisely, Zen isn't about dogma, it's about direct experience. It's about each of us finding our own path, our own way of expressing this Zen spirit in our lives.
There's a passage where Watts talks about Zen being a medicine for the ill effects of conditioning. What do you think he means by that?
I think he's getting at the fact that we're all conditioned by our culture, by our upbringing, by all of our experiences, and this conditioning can often lead to that sense of separation, of anxiety, of striving for something that's always just out of reach. Zen offers a way to break free from those patterns and reconnect with our true nature, which is already whole and complete.
So it's about letting go of those false selves, those ideas of who we think we should be, and embracing who we truly are.
That's a wonderful way to put it. Zen is about coming home to ourselves, to that place of peace and freedom that's already within us.
That sounds amazing, but how do we actually get there? How do we cultivate this Zen mind in the middle of our busy, often chaotic lives?
There are many paths as we've been exploring. Art is one path, meditation is another. Even just paying close attention to our everyday experiences can be a path.
So it's not about escaping from the world, but about finding that stillness, that awareness within the world.
Exactly. Zen isn't about withdrawing from life. It's about engaging with it fully, with all our senses, with an open heart, with an open mind.
I'm starting to understand, but I have to be honest. There's a part of me that still feels a little lost. I understand the concepts, but putting them into practice seems like a whole other challenge.
That's completely understandable. Zen isn't something you learn by just reading about it. It's something you have to experience. And those experiences can be elusive, sometimes paradoxical, even frustrating.
Watts also talks about the importance of not wobbling. What does he mean by that?
He's pointing to the need for commitment, for trusting the process, even when we don't fully understand it. It's about letting go of our doubts, our fears, our need to control, and allowing ourselves to be guided by something deeper.
So it's about having faith, not in a religious sense necessarily, but in a sense of trusting our own intuition, our own inner wisdom.
You've got it. Zen is about cultivating that inner knowing, that sense of trust in ourselves and in the unfolding of life.
This is so much richer and more complex than I ever imagined. It feels like we're only just beginning to explore the depths of this Zen world.
It is a journey, and it's true, we've just barely scratched the surface. Zen is often described as a pathless path. There's no one right way to do it, no rule book to follow. It's about each of us discovering our own way of expressing this Zen spirit in our lives.
That makes sense, but it's also kind of daunting. Where do we even begin?
Well, Watts talks about how Zen practice often begins with disillusionment. It's about seeing through those illusions that keep us stuck in those cycles of suffering.
Okay.
The attachments we have to pleasure, to a fixed sense of self, to those unattainable goals we chase after.
So you're saying we have to let go of all the things we think we need to be happy? That sounds pretty radical.
It's not necessarily about letting go of everything, but more about recognizing that true happiness, it doesn't come from those external things. It comes from a deeper understanding of ourselves and the nature of reality itself.
I can see how that would be a challenge, especially in a culture that's so focused on striving, achieving, accumulating more and more.
Right, and that's why Zen is often going to a radical path. It challenges those fundamental assumptions we have about what it means to live a good life.
Watts quotes Linchi, who says, "If a man seeks the Buddha, that man loses the Buddha." I've always found that statement so puzzling. What do you make of it?
I think it highlights that paradox of seeking. Sometimes the very act of searching for something actually prevents us from finding it. It's like trying to grab hold of water. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers.
So how do we stop seeking without becoming passive, without just giving up altogether?
It's not about giving up. It's about surrendering, letting go of that need to control, to grasp, and allowing ourselves to be guided by something larger than ourselves.
Which brings us back to that idea of wu wei. Doesn't it? Effortless action. Maybe that's the key.
It could be. It's about acting with intention, but without forcing things, aligning ourselves with that natural flow of life.
I've noticed that Watts uses a lot of metaphors to try and explain these concepts. The gardener, the moon and the water, the bird flying in the wind. What do you think that is?
I think metaphors are essential because ultimately Zen is pointing to something that's beyond language. It's an experience, a way of being that can't be fully captured in words.
So we have to feel it, not just think about it.
Exactly. Zen is about direct experience. It's about waking up to the reality of this moment, right here, right now.
And that's where all those Zen practices come in, right? Meditations, the coherence, The arts we've been talking about, they're all tools to help us to wake up.
Precisely. They're all ways of cultivating mindfulness, that present moment awareness that lets us see the world through fresh eyes.
And it's not about becoming some kind of superhuman right.
Mm.
Watts emphasizes that Zen masters are just ordinary people.
They're ordinary people who have awakened to their true nature, which is also our true nature, and that's the beauty of it. Zen is accessible to everyone regardless of background beliefs or circumstances.
So it's not about escaping from the world, but about transforming how we relate to the world.
That's the heart of it. Zen invites us to live more fully, more authentically, more in harmony with ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah. This deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of Zen and even more questions than when we started.
And that's the wonderful thing about Zen. It's a journey, not a destination. A path of continuous discovery, deepening awareness, ever-expanding compassion.
Well, as we wrap up, is there a key takeaway you'd like to leave our listener with?
If Zen is about seeing reality without filters, how might that apply to how you experience art or even your own creative endeavors?
That's a really powerful question. I know we'll be reflecting on that for a while. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Zen and art. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep waking up to the beauty and wonder that surrounds us.
Follow the infinite within with Cecilia to explore profound insights on pantheism. Embrace the oneness of existence and unlock the mysteries within you.